From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello and welcome to The Hub. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. The 2025 BRICS Summit has just concluded in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Under the theme, Strengthening Global South Cooperation for More Inclusive and Sustainable Governance, what does this summit mean for the world today? Why are more countries choosing to join or align with the BRICS platform? And what fresh momentum can BRICS inject at a time when protectionism and unilateralism are on the rise? Earlier in Beijing, I spoke with Anna Rosario Malinger-Uy, Director and Vice President for External Affairs at the Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute, to delve deeper into these questions. Here is our conversation. Anna, great to have you with us on CGTN. We know that we have 11 official members of BRICS since its expansion. Now we have more partner countries joining this platform, including most recently Vietnam. What do you think is behind the increasing attraction of BRICS, countries from West Asia to East Asia to Southeast Asia aligning with this platform? What does this trend signal for Asia's development?
BRICS is attractive to Asian countries and even among countries in the global south, more specifically this time among Southeast Asian countries with the inclusion as a partner country of Vietnam, precisely because BRICS first and foremost advocate what you call a fair global order. So it means that, everyone has a say in everything that is, discussed in the global affairs, especially when you talk about economics. The second one, I think, is it offers an alternative when you talk about development financing. As you can see, the world has been always within the framework of this so-called liberal kind of global order led by institutions like the WTO and IMF and World Bank. So BRICS is offering a new kind of paradigm to this, which does not have really strings attached, like, for example, structural policies. And now you have an alternative, especially to development financing, and now you have new development bank. I think another important aspect why BRICS becomes so attractive to Asian countries is, in many cases, it respects what you call sovereignty and non-interference, especially in the internal affairs of many global countries in the world. So this is very important, especially for Asian countries. The second is what you call support for South-South cooperation and development. When you talk about support on South-South cooperation and development, basically you're talking about transfer of technology, cooperation when you talk about how to proceed with a new development paradigm, financing that is more respective of the internal affairs of a country and not necessarily imposing some kind of structural policy that the North has usually have done thus far across time. Another thing I think is more on the foster of innovation and resilience in the global South, especially when you talk about fintech or financial technology, AI, quantum computing. These are now the buzz when you talk about economic development. And in BRICS, you have countries that have this technology and this capacity, especially China at the moment. And also, if you look at BRICS, really, it's kinds of a platform of building solidarity for global South countries to confront global challenges. Example, climate, the fight against climate change, the fight against poverty, the fight against promoting peace in the world. These are important issues that Asian countries would want to align itself. And one important thing about BRICS is that it put premiums on development agenda rather than on military alignment and what you call Cold War mentality or bloc confrontation. So this makes BRICS very attractive, especially that Asian countries wants to have priority on economic development and prosperity rather than military alignment or this kind of what usually the United States is very good at and creating conflict all across the world. Yeah,
I think you're making a very important point, Anna, in that if you look at previous paradigms and alliances, be it NATO or U.S.-led Indo-Pacific strategy most recently, they're centered around America's nuclear deterrence and nuclear umbrella. Of course, NATO being part of the grand strategy of the United States post-World War II. And you're saying that, or new organizations such as BRICS, such as SCO, with China being a leader among others, has less of a military component, but more of a development agenda.
Yes, I think that is the attraction among BRICS countries. And I think one more important aspect that we need not forget about BRICS is it is a pioneer, or it is a platform that is actually trying to push what you call a multipolar world as against to a unipolar hegemonic world that is being led by the United States and the Western Alliance. And this is very important for many countries who would want to have peace in the world, and I think who would want to prioritize development rather than this military kind of Cold War mentality that is more like an emblem of the United States and its allies in the West. Yeah.
How do you see the relationship between emerging blocs such as BRICS versus the existing world order, with NATO, with the United States-led alliances being at the center of it, or at least so for the past 50, 60, 70 years? Do you see BRICS complementing the US-led world order post-World War II, or do you see the two alliances or the two kinds of organizations running into conflicts with each other?
For me, the way I see BRICS, it's not necessarily trying to, push away the what you call Western alliance, or what you call the U.S. Led global order. But I think BRICS offers an alternative to the world at the moment, because when you talk about priorities, really, the Western side of the world, when you talk about even in terms of how they provide aid, it's always with constraints. It always has some kind of strings attached, especially when you talk about interference in the local affairs and the domestic affairs of a country. But when you talk about BRICS, it offers an alternative. It's focused on development, which is, respecting of the sovereignty and strategic autonomy of a country, which is not necessarily synonymous with the US-led global order. So in a way, BRICS, it presents a different world, it's a different dynamic and a different agenda by which many countries in the global south are attracted to it, precisely because the global south, as you can see, has been exploited and and been colonized by Western alliance that would include European Western states and even the United States. So this is more an alternative, and it offers more a future that is multipolar and less of hegemony, but more of cooperation and more of focus on development and prosperity.
Right. This year, actually, we're marking the 80th anniversary of the war against Japanese aggression, also the victory of the World War II, that is the anti-fascism war across Europe, Asia Pacific, and elsewhere. What enduring lessons do you think this important anniversary offer for today's policymakers and politicians when it comes to preserving peace and advancing the collective interests of all?
Oh, well, for me, the 80th anniversary of the world victory against fascism, first and foremost, give us a lesson that, peace is very important, and you cannot have development without peace. That is something that all countries in the world has to think about and has to preserve. Second is, in this 21st century, there's a need for countries to push for a multipolar world that, and that there's no one that controls the world. There's no hegemonic, a country, a superpower that controls everything, but and that the world should be built upon cooperation, and global security is supposed to be shared by everyone and a responsibility of everyone, and should not be dominated or dictated by a superpower. I think these are or countries that once dominate the world. I think this is the lessons that we can draw from that part of history. We should uphold diplomacy, and we should uphold negotiations as much as possible, and a peaceful way of resolving conflict. This is important lessons that we all have to remember.
The Philippines recently elevated defense ties with Lithuania and is promoting a so-called single theater strategy in the East and South China Seas with non-Asian powers. How do you think these actions reconcile with ASEAN's principle of regional solutions for regional security? And do you think such external alignments could potentially undermine trust that is much needed for peace and stability in this very region?
That is a new development in the Philippines at the moment under a Marcos Jr. government. So, I mean, the Philippines' recent move to elevate a defense ties with Lithuania, which is a non-Asian country and at the same time a NATO ally, with the so-called a single theater strategy that makes Southeast Asia, South China Sea in coordination with external powers like the US and its European allies is for me really a significant tilt away from what you call ASEAN centrality when you talk about solving problems, especially dispute that is within the dispute in the region. So this is a little bit, it's not really a little bit, but it's really a shift away, a signal of shifting away from ASEAN way of resolving conflicts and trying to invite non-ASEAN countries to be, to interfere on how the ASEAN countries resolve its conflict, especially when you talk about the South China Sea. So for me, really, this is not a positive development as far as I'm concerned, as far as the region is concerned. And also, in many ways, this is a contradiction when you talk about ASEAN norms and regional security framework. This is something that the Philippines, instead of trying to strengthen its kind of relation, even in terms of defense and military among its neighbors, it's somewhat looking outside of the region, and that is for me a little bit more uncomfortable because for me I believe that the Philippines as part of Asia and part of ASEAN should have more relation, even in defense and military cooperation with its neighbors. And I think, and also more respecting of how Asian resolve its conflict. Because the more Philippines would have this defense relationship with NATO allies, that is also one way of opening the region to a more intervention or some kind of subtle interference from NATO countries, which is I don't think as Asian countries would be happy about. So in a way, this would also in a way maybe alienate or maybe draw some reactions coming from neighbors like Malaysia and Indonesia, which and even Vietnam, who would want to maintain ASEAN centrality. So I really hope that the Philippine government under Marcos Jr. would change its strategy and would see itself more as an Asian country that should have more deeper relationship with ASEAN countries and even Asia Pacific in a broader sense. Yeah.
There's a big lesson here, right, Anna? When you think about great powers, the colonizers using this divide and conquer strategies. If you think about South Africa, when the European colonizers really divided and conquered South Africa, introducing systems that pitted one tribe in South Africa against another. When you think about the European colonizers, taking over the Middle East, pitting one country against another. The United States of America, pitting one Southeast Asian country in Indochina against the other. And now, of course, with external powers intervening in South China Sea, in Asia Pacific, that has made matters worse than it could have been. And like you said, there ought to be greater relations between China and the Philippines.
I would agree, Guan. I really would agree, and also not only with China but even with the rest of Asia Pacific. And I think one important thing that the Philippines should be maintaining and should be more consistent is its foreign policy. As far as we are concerned, Filipinos in our constitution, it advocates and it mandates an independent foreign policy. This would mean neutrality. Because I believe Asian countries, especially Southeast Asian countries, should maintain neutrality and should, promote Asian centrality when you talk about resolution of dispute with any countries for that matter, especially with major powers like China. Having a good relation with China is very advantageous for the Philippines, especially in the economic front. And this is, I think, the disadvantage right now with Marcos' government, that the foreign policy of his government is very much leaning to the West, especially with the United States, and enhancing the so-called Mutual Defense Treaty, EDCA agreements, and with so many military-related agreements, which is I don't think it benefits the country really, but I think economic prosperity and development should be the focus in the same way that ASEAN countries is focusing more on development and economic prosperity. So this is a bit sad, but I'm optimistic that if there's a change of leadership, maybe the Philippines would be applying for a BRICS partner to be part of BRICS in a matter of time, and that would be very good for us. Yeah.
Anna, thanks so much for joining us at this hour.